Happy Monday, everyone. Tara Talmadge alongside Mike Irwin. It is time for Ask Mike. And Mike, let's start off like we do every week with a COVID-19 update and actually have a lot to talk about this time.
Yeah, we have our first, it looks like we have our first SEC school that's going to postpone a game, and it's Vanderbilt. The word we're getting is that they were just barely above that scholarship number.
Threshold,
it was 56,
yeah.
The threshold is supposed to be 53 last week, and they had problems. This week they're going to drop below that, so they want to postpone that game. This gets into something interesting, and this is a theory on my part. It's not proven. I can't prove it. But I've always been curious as to how they do contact tracing from school to school to school.
Yeah.
I mean, it's pretty obvious if you get a COVID case, you're out.
You're out.
But how do they determine, okay, but you saw this guy and you were here, and so we're going to quarantine 12 people, whereas another school in that same situation might go, oh, we're going to quarantine 6 because we want to play. So it's not surprising to me that Vanderbilt would be the school that got caught up in this, because what we're hearing is they have a bunch of contact tracing people.
Right.
They're out under quarantine but didn't necessarily test positive. And so I think what we're going to see when this is all over is Vanderbilt was much more stringent in doing the contact tracing and quarantining people that might have been in contact with somebody that tested positive than maybe some of the other schools.
Yeah.
So that's a change, but we still see most of the games being played. We're getting well past a third of the way past college football season, almost halfway. We're still playing. It's interesting that the NFL is having more problems now than college football. And high school teams have had some problems initially across the country. It seems to be going down a little bit. The concern now has to be that, at least in some of the states, after declining COVID numbers, they're now going back up, including here in Arkansas. Some of that probably can be attributed to the public schools opening back up. Some of it may be the simple fact that people are so tired of the mask and the mandates and the social distancing that they're just fudging.
I think that has a lot to do with it.
And then we have a state like Florida, which opens back up completely. They're the first state to do that, and then they immediately have more COVID cases. The ultimate answer to this is a vaccine. And we keep hearing, oh, it'll be available probably by the end of next month. And then it's first going to go to the first responders, and then it'll get back to the rest of us sometime around January. So in sports, you project ahead. How will that affect crowds? It still looks like we may have greatly reduced crowds for basketball.
Yeah.
I think by the time baseball comes around, the fact that it's an outdoor sport and the vaccine should be widely available by then, we might have a normal college baseball season in terms of fans being there, the stadium full.
Yeah, that would be nice. A nice change of pace, especially after the way the last season ended for them. But let's move on to our questions. And our first question of the week comes from My Three Boneheads. Great name right there. Who asks, can you explain the forward pass rule as it applies to intentional grounding and compare the rules to what happened at Auburn? Also, why are we putting in second and third string quarterbacks in the red zone just to run option keepers? Isn't it nice to be competitive again? Three-parter right there. Let's start with
you're going to have to help me with these multiple question people. You may have to come back and remind me. I will answer the first question. The intentional grounding is pretty simple. As long as you ground the ball or spike it forward, it's considered basically an incomplete pass. Yeah. And the clock stops. In this particular case, the fumble and then picking the ball back up changes things. And then when you turn around and spike it backwards, it becomes a free ball, a fumble. The problem was that whoever blew the whistle apparently either didn't see the initial fumble or certainly didn't see the backward spike. So the whistle blows. Everyone runs, 2 or 3 people start running after the ball. The play initially, according to Sam Pittman, what he was told was, well, they looked at it. Now, you can see the official when he does the review, you can see him reacting, oh no, we got a problem here. But Sam Pittman said that he came over and said to him, well, because the whistle blew, the play has to be dead, and they get the ball back. We're going to rule it an intentional grounding so to avoid being sacked. So he gets a penalty, but there really is no penalty. There's just the loss of down. They kick a field goal and win the game. Now, when Pittman came back to the locker room and then went on his radio show too and said, well, they offered me this explanation, that you couldn't review this once the whistle had blown. The SEC realized that's a mistake.
Yeah.
Because you can review it. It's been done before. So they came out with another explanation. And this involved what they called immediate and continuous football action.
Yeah.
What they were trying to suggest was that because the whistle blew, only a couple of guys went after the ball, and Arkansas's guy went after it harder than Auburn's guy.
Yeah.
So it was not fair. There was no way to determine if none of that had happened, who would have come up with the ball. Well, the only problem with that is there is video evidence of a game from last year, South Carolina and Missouri, where virtually the same thing happens. A guy spikes the ball backwards, it rolls into the end zone. A couple of Missouri players run over there, look at it, and pick it up. And they had also blown a whistle on that play, but then when they went and reviewed it, they said, oh, we got to overturn this because that's not what really happened, and it was a fumble. It wasn't an incomplete pass or an intentional grounding. So, you know, we're going to give the ball to Missouri, and they got a touchdown after it. So the SEC's own explanation doesn't hold water with what they did before. And what the final verdict on this is, and this is interesting, around college football, virtually everywhere I looked on Sunday across the internet, everyone's saying, hey, Arkansas should have won the game. Yeah. Except inside the SEC. This is where I saw no reaction, except for the SEC office. Dari Noka comes on the SEC network and gives their typical answer, and they don't want to touch it. You can tell, we don't want to touch this. You have this supervisor of officials in the NFL who's retired now from officiating, but he's a Fox Sports analyst, and he just came out and said that Arkansas should have won the game. Yeah. There was that reaction, but again, it was outside the SEC. You get inside the SEC, and this is what I want to say about the league. If it doesn't affect me, I'm not going to talk about it. Somebody else's problem. So this is one of the reasons these things don't get corrected, is because unless something becomes everybody's problem or a majority of the school's problems, what incentive do they have to worry about it?
Never heard anything from Sankey or anything like that.
Okay, so the
another
other
part of the question was, why are we putting second and third string quarterbacks in the red zone? Which is
that's a reference to an early fourth quarter play in which Felipe Franks ran the ball down inside the 5, got tackled, and he gets up and you can see he's done something to his hand. He's looking at his hand, and he comes out, and I guess they want to look at it. So they didn't really take him out like they did in the Mississippi State game just to bring in the backup quarterback.
Well, I think it's part of their goal line package. I think that's something
he looked like he got. I think there was some suggestion in this case he got hurt.
Okay.
So they're looking at his hand. Then they bring in Malik Hornsby, who's a freshman quarterback, so he's the number 3 guy. And I guess if you try to figure out what Kendall Briles was thinking here, well, KJ Jefferson didn't do very good in this last week. We're going to try this guy. Well, same thing happens, only it's not third down, it's second down. Runs the second down play, goes nowhere. Runs the third down play, goes nowhere. And then they still kick the field goal so they don't lose any points off of it. But I think I wouldn't jump on Kendall Briles for this one because I think he didn't just pull Franks out. I think there was an issue with his hand. They looked at it before they got the ball back, and then he ended up being okay.
My issue with it is also you're running the same play twice.
That's an issue. Why are you not? If you're going to do this, at least you ought to work on it in practice and come up with a pass play out of that, or give the ball to a running back or something. Just
if it didn't work
reverse.
The first time, why are you going to do it a second time?
Don't run a reverse, to Hammonds. We don't want that.
Okay, one more on that was. Let's see.
I think that's it, isn't it?
Is it nice to be competitive again?
Yeah,
competitive again.
It is.
Absolutely.
Nice that he's in a good mood after he complained.
All right, let's get to our next question. It is from Texas Hog fan 2679, who wants to know, why did the defense make such a quick turnaround with Odom, but the offense get off to a slower start with Briles? I know Briles is a great coach, but is it just that offense takes longer to develop rhythm and timing?
You know, I think it has to do with a couple of things. You got the new coordinator, and yes, Odom's new too, but he's got the new coordinator with a new quarterback. And when you combine those things, you got Felipe Franks. He's not only running a new offense, he's got entirely new teammates that he's not sure about. He's never played with them in a game, just practice, and he didn't go through spring football with these guys, or at least they didn't go have spring football or a spring game. So it's all new to him. And if you look at what's happened, In each of the 3 games, the offense has improved because he has improved.
Yeah.
And I think Kendall Briles is starting to get a better feel for who can do what, when, where, and how. And so we've seen the offensive numbers go up every week in terms of point production, in terms of running the ball, throwing the ball, or whatever. And this week they're going up against Ole Miss, which Ole Miss is a really good offensive team. But the numbers could go up again this week. And also, if you look at the defense, they've kind of been stagnant ever since that first game. It's not going to another level. I wouldn't say it was terrible, and there were explanations for maybe why they didn't tackle real well in this game.
Yeah.
But you don't see, you saw the defense jump off to a big early start, and they've just kind of been level. Whereas
Which, you know what, it's not a bad thing as long as they're not dipping to.
No, but what I'm saying is the offense has kind of come up.
Yeah.
So whereas you had this, now you kind of got this. So it's not as exaggerated as it looks, in my opinion.
All right, our next question comes from Pork Soda. Always has some good questions for you, Mike. How much effect did the weather have on the outcome of this game?
Well, it affected both teams in tackling because both of them had tackling issues, and I think that's pretty understandable. You need a good base in order to tackle, and when your footwork and footing is slippery, you get out of position, you're kind of lunging for people. I think that explains why both, but to me, that's a wash.
Yeah.
It doesn't really favor one team or the other because they're both having tackling issues. The difference in the game was in the first quarter when it was raining pretty heavily, I think Kendall Briles was reluctant to throw the ball. Auburn wasn't, and they jump out to that first quarter and on into the second quarter, jumped out to a 17-0 lead. Now, when the rain stopped, at that point, Arkansas outscored them something like 29-13 or something, 28-13 or something like that. It just changed everything when the rain stopped. So my point is, let's don't talk about these guys being mutters anymore and show that Razorback pig, you know, what's his name? Tusk rolling around in the mud. They're not Tusk. They are players, and they may have Razorbacks on their uniform, but they're not pigs, and these guys don't do better in the mud, I'm telling you.
Always better to have good weather conditions.
They do better in dry conditions.
All right, Delta Boy has our next question and wants to know, how long can we stand this special teams fiasco?
Well, there were more problems, especially you ended up with a blocked punt, which gave the other team 7 points. That, again, you take that away and Arkansas wins. I don't know. I don't know what's going on inside that staff, but all I know is Scott Fountain, I mean, in the preseason period, Sam Pittman played him up to be the best special teams coach in America. And even to the point where he's not only Arkansas's first full-time special teams coach, he's a coordinator, which means he's right in there with Barry Odom and Kendall Briles. He's right up there with that status. But the problem is that's clearly the worst part of this team right now. And after a decent game against Mississippi State, they went backwards again. They had some other coverage issues in this game. They had problems with guys lining up wrong on punts.
All the penalties.
And punts having to be brought back because they got penalties. And then you had the one incident, which I don't know that you can blame on anybody specifically, where the extra point, which was missed, where George Caratan, the holder, he's the punter, but he's also the holder on placements. The ball is wet, slips in his hand, he's fumbling for it, and then the kick doesn't come off. And that ended up causing a huge number of problems because Sam Pittman is trying to, every time Arkansas scores, he's trying to go for 2 to get back on track, and it's not working, and all of a sudden you got big problems there. I don't know that you can blame that so much on the special teams coach. It was just the wet conditions, although you'd think they would do wet snaps. In practice, but you know, I don't know if that would have made a difference. But this is the head scratcher. This guy, he's Sam Pittman said it, he's the first coach I tried to hire because he tried to hire him before he even was offered the job. He told Fountain when they were both on the staff at Georgia, hey, if I get offered this Arkansas job, I want you to go with me. So that's before any of the other coaches, and he's really high on him. And it's now all of a sudden he's having to go, oh, this isn't working very well. So I don't know what's going on back inside the staff, but something needs to change in a hurry.
Yeah, I'm sure Sam Pittman is on him to clean things up for this next game against Ole Miss. Our next question is J Hicks 3636, who says, I know the emphasis at Arkansas, as with most schools, is men's sports. I think the rise in the overall women's sports program at the university is amazing, though. A lot of fans are missing out by not following them. What are your thoughts?
Well, I never tell fans what they ought to watch. That's none of my business. You can watch what you want to watch. As far as the women's programs, though, they are amazing right now.
Yeah.
You got the women's cross country is #1 in the country. Women's soccer is, I think, #3.
Yeah.
I think softball is pretty good.
Right.
Women's basketball is good. I think those two programs may be top 10 pretty soon. You can end up with 4 top 10 programs over there. And they're kind of outshining the men in that respect.
They are.
So, and look, I will say this. Hunter Yurchek's always very good about promoting them.
Yeah.
He does a great job of letting everybody know, hey, we're proud of our soccer team, we're proud of our whatever, whoever does well that week, he's talking about it.
Yeah.
So they're not getting ignored. I think it's a lot like it used to be with track under John McDonald. Nobody went nuts over it, but they always had pride in the fact that it was by far the best track program in America.
And hey, we're talking with Mike Neighbors on Wednesday,
Okay.
so you can tune in for that one. All right, our next question comes from 3-10, who asks, why did we not kick the PAT twice? Why did we put in a third-string quarterback when 3 points was almost a certainty? And why do we continue to try to run reverse plays? If not for these whys, would have won the game.
Okay, again,
Let's
I'm not going
start
to
with the
get all
first one.
over Sam Pittman for trying to catch up. I mean,
Yeah.
that's an either-or thing. Some coaches are just going to go ahead and not try it and wait till the end and try to make it up. Other coaches are going to try, let's get this out of the way right now. Let's get back on track.
And if it had worked,
Then he'd
would've
be
been
looking
great.
great. If you want to complain about this, complain about the fact that they don't seem to have a very good goal line offense.
Yeah.
That ties
point.
in with that other thing we talked about. They just don't seem to have anything that seems to work from around the 3-yard line in.
Yeah.
So maybe they need to work on that more. What was the other question?
The other question is,
That is the
why did
quarterback.
we put a third? Yeah, we kind of talked
We've
about
already
that,
talked
though.
about that. Again, I don't blame anybody for that. I think Frank's had his wrist banged up
Yeah,
on that.
and lastly, why do we continue to try to run reverse
Ugh,
plays?
that's the one. That's the one I gotta look. T.J. Hammond's, and every time they've done that and it's been blown up, the blocking has been really awful. But he's got this problem in that he always thinks he can circle around behind those guys like he's so
then-
fast, and then he just ends up going backwards. To me, when that happens, you see them there. You get the ball in the reverse there. They're standing there. You go this way, not that way. Go forward. Maybe you don't gain anything, but you don't
But
lose
you don't
seven.
lose it.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Our next question comes from Peak Hog, who wants to know, is there an audio record of the conversation that goes on between the SEC review team and the officials on the field? I'm old enough to remember the SMU game.
Well, the SMU game was years ago when there was a pass interference that was called and it wasn't. And there was some talk about what the officials said after the game. But I'm sure there's an audio record of that because those people, they do reviews of these officials after a game, and I'm sure everything they do down there is recorded, so they can then go back later in a meeting and say, okay, you did this, you said that, what do we do about this? And also, if they're coordinating with a central location of other officials back there, they want to make sure that all works smoothly. That's for them. I guarantee the league office, if you ask them, would say, well, that's not for the public.
Yeah, I don't think we'll ever
So I don't
hear
think
that.
that's ever going to be made public.
But you did get the facial reaction from one of the refs, which I think says a lot.
The TV people do a great job of capturing emotions.
That was good.
Let's show this guy's face as he goes, uh-oh, I don't want to have to explain this one.
That's very telling right there. All right, let's move on. Our next question is from Pork Soda again, who wants to know, who do you think would win in a head-to-head matchup between the 2006 Razorbacks and the 2010 Razorbacks?
Ooh, boy, that's a toughie. Let's see. 2006 Razorbacks. That's Arkansas's only outright SEC West title. They didn't share it with anybody. They won it outright. But then they lost the championship game to Florida, and then they lost the Capital One Bowl to Wisconsin. So they ended up 10-4.
Huh?
The 2010 team finished tied for second in the SEC West, and they lost the Sugar Bowl, but they actually ended up with a 10-3 record, not 10-4. So a little bit better record. Now let's go beyond that and look at the 2011 team, because they finished third in the SEC West, and they won the Cotton Bowl, and they ended up 11-2, and that is the fourth best record in the history of the school. You got the national championship team. You got a year later, I think they were 10-1, and then the 77 team went 11-1. So those are the three teams with a better record than that 2011 team. So that's tough.
Yeah.
How do you evaluate his overall record, is how you finish in the conference or whatever? I'm just going to be non-objective in just my opinion of watching all of those teams.
Yeah.
I think the 2006 team with McFadden and all those guys, that was a better team. They almost beat Florida. There were some things that happened in that game that could have gone the other way. And then I think if they win the championship game, they might have had a shot at the national championship and might have won it.
Wow.
There was just a lot of controversy on that team, some things that hurt it. But that team was really talented, and I'm going to go with the 2006 team.
Maybe Sam Pittman will develop a team that could give them a run for their money. We'll wait and see on that one. All right, the Bionic Pig has 2 questions for you, Mike. One, am I the only one that can see the offense is improving every single week while playing top 20 opponents? Yeah, let's go with that one first.
Okay, that one first. No, we've already talked about it. Their numbers have gone up every week. Point production, Felipe Frank's numbers have gone up. The turnovers have gone down every week. So in every way you can measure this, it looks like the offense is improving. So no, you're not the only one that's noticed that.
All right, second part of that question though was, with the 2021 wide receivers class loaded with size and track speed, will we see the normal up-tempo Briles offense next season? I
don't think you have to wait till next season. I think we've already seen a little bit of it. Now, there's 2 kinds of tempo. He may be not talking about the tempo which you snap the ball, but just kind of the wide open, let's get big chunk plays and whatever. They're definitely running their offense at tempo at times, so we've already seen that. I think we'll see a more wide open offense as the season progresses. I think what we're going to see as Franks gets better and better, you're going to see bigger plays, and then once you do that, it opens up the running game more, especially if we have Traylon Smith and Rakeem Boyd both playing, where you can spell one or the other. Guy gets tired, bring the other one in. I would love to see both of those guys playing now, kind of subbing for each other, because they're different kind of runners, and I think they would present a big problem for opposing defenses.
Yeah, Traylon Smith was surprising to me. I did not know that he was going to be that good. All right, our next question is from Pig Daddy Kane, who wants to know, who would win this game, the 2009 Florida officiating crew versus 2020 Auburn and their officiating crew?
Okay, if you're talking about win in terms of being bad,
that's probably
the 2009 crew would win that hands down. There wasn't just one blown call in that game. There were multiple. 3 or 4. And there was, honestly, when you sat down and looked at what happened that game, there was almost a bias there. You could just almost see it. And it was bad enough that some of those referees in that game got suspended. I don't think you're going to see any suspensions of what happened at the Auburn game. I think in the Auburn game, they made a mistake, then tried to correct it by giving Sam Pittman some nonsense, and then the league made it worse by offering their other nonsense. And we all know it's baloney, but nobody's going to do anything about it.
All right, our next question is from Blood Red Hog, who asks, are SEC officials just poorly trained, or is there a conspiracy against lesser teams when they play the bigger name SEC teams?
I've said for a long time they're poorly trained, and I don't think the standards are good enough, and it is a problem with the SEC. If you're going to have the best conference in college football, if you're going to have the best fans, it just means more and all that, best facilities, best everything. Why don't you have the best officials?
Yeah.
And the officials don't get better, in my opinion, because I don't think there's any pressure to do that. I think the conference spends way too much time trying to defend things and make it look like, oh, this was just an honest mistake, and it may have been an honest mistake. But you've still got to come back in and go and tell officials, you got to do a better job. Now, the real answer to this is to have these officials be full-time. And people have asked me, well, how would that work? Well, it's real simple. When you're not officiating during the week and even in the off season, you just sit in a room all day long and review calls that were made and sit and discuss, we should have done this, that we did this right, we did that wrong, and you're working on your craft all the time.
Yeah.
Instead of just working your other job and jumping on a plane and showing up somewhere and trying to do the job right. Again, here's the problem with this. It's not going to get better till most of the conference schools see that it's an issue. A few schools like Arkansas that are upset about it and their fan base, that's not going to change it.
No. Well, wait, so do you think there's a bias, though?
I don't think it's being done necessarily because of a bias. I just think they don't want to mess with it.
Yeah.
You know, we're pretty good. We don't need this stuff. We'll let somebody complain and we'll just move on down the road. Now, there's probably a little bias in this respect. I believe that if Arkansas, if Alabama had been playing
exactly,
Auburn,
that's what I was waiting for.
they're not, and especially if Alabama's undefeated and it looks like they might be headed to the championship game, I don't think they let that game be decided against Alabama and Alabama loses on a blown call. I think they come back and go, whoa, we got this wrong. We're going to reverse that. You win, Alabama.
Exactly. All right, Lanny has our next question and asks, discuss how Arkansas must put the Auburn game aside and adjust for Ole Miss. Does Arkansas have enough firepower to match Lane Kiffin's offense?
I think he's already done that. I think that's all they can do. Pittman's smart. He's a good coach. I mean, they're not going to sit around and discuss that game. They probably already put it behind them, much more so than the fans. As far as Ole Miss, look, this is a weird game because you're probably facing the most potent offense you've faced yet.
Yeah.
These guys can really move down the field in a hurry. If you watch that Alabama game, and Alabama's got a really good defense. They're good. This is going to be a tremendous challenge for Arkansas's defense. But their defense isn't good. It's the worst defense statistically in the SEC. So if Arkansas's offense is improving and they're going up against a defense that's worse than they've seen, you would think a lot of points would be scored, so this becomes a track meet. What happens in a track meet? Usually what decides a game like that is turnovers. So Arkansas has to at least try to force a turnover or two and come up with the ball, whether it's a pick or a fumble recovery or whatever, and don't give them the ball. Don't make mistakes. That's the way you win a game like this.
No more special teams penalties in that game.
That's right.
All right. Gosh, this name. Nutless Hog on Hogville says, I do not understand how the conference office works. Who evaluates and determines the job performance that our commissioner is doing? These blatant calls that are coming out of his office is squarely on his shoulders, and who's looking over his?
You know, theoretically, the SEC as an office, as an entity, only exists because of the member schools. That's just like with the NCAA. Everybody complains about it, but who really runs who supervises the NCAA? Well, it would be all of the schools. But again, this gets back into what I talked about before. In order for there to be some sort of correction with a conference commissioner, oh, we don't like you doing this or that, you would have to have a majority of the schools think it was a big enough problem to go in there and say, hey, you got to change this. They don't. They're all split. They're all looking for their own self-interest. And they don't worry about it when a problem pops up that affects one school or two schools or whatever. It's if it doesn't affect me, I don't care. And so this is why you don't see a conference commissioner gets supervised. Who's going to supervise him? If one school complains, if the other 13 don't, who cares? As an example, look what Hunter Yurachek did. He did inquire about the explanation. And then he came back and said, well, they gave me the same explanation they offered, so that's it. There wasn't anything else he could do. If he had had a bunch of other ADs behind him, maybe he could have gone in there and got something done. Let's go look at the scheduling thing that occurred earlier in the year. It was pretty obvious what happened, but who's going to complain? Only 2 or 3 schools got shafted. The others didn't, so they're not going to complain. That's just the way it is. You can go all the way back to when A&M came into the SEC. Arkansas had this great rivalry game the day after Thanksgiving with LSU. And one of the ways they got A&M into the SEC was they said, well, you're giving up the Texas rivalry, so we're going to have to create another one. We'll create one with LSU. You two schools are close together. It's a close drive between those 2 schools. You recruit a lot of the same players. We'll give you the day after Thanksgiving game. Well, I'm sure Jeff Long was going, well, what about our game?
Yeah, exactly.
And I don't think they gave him a choice. And so he did the next best thing. He went, well, okay, if you're going to make us do this, we want to keep the A&M game in Dallas for a while. And that's why that game is still in Dallas, because A&M really wants to move it. But I guess the SEC said, well, A&M, you can't have everything, so we'll do this. But that game's eventually going to go away. So what happens? In order to basically get Texas A&M into the SEC, in order to basically do that, they just ran over Arkansas. Again, what was the feeling there? If you ask around the league, well, we got to get A&M and it makes the league better. So it's Arkansas is the only school affected by that decision negatively. The rest of them don't care. So nothing will be done about that and was done about it. That's the way all this works.
All right, our next question comes from Parallax Pig, who says, I saw your tweet about Arkansas being a non-factor in the SEC office. Do you feel that's acceptable? And if not, what can we do to change it?
Well, it's not acceptable. You could change a little bit of it by having a better football program.
Yeah.
But we've seen Arkansas with good basketball programs, and they sometimes doesn't matter. I think there's two ways this could get corrected. You could move the SEC office outside the SEC, put it in a place like St. Louis or Cincinnati where there's no local influence over the people that work there. Because let's face it, if you get up and go to work in Birmingham every single day as a part of the SEC crew that works in that office, who are the people you're around every day? Auburn fans and Alabama fans. So if you move it outside, some of that influence goes away. And the other way you could do it is for Arkansas to leave the SEC and go to the Big 12. Well, neither one of those things are going to happen, so you don't get it resolved.
All right, our next question comes from Hob Hog, who asks, is there anyone on the staff assigned to watch replays and notify Coach Pittman when we should ask for a review? Good question.
No one's asked him yet.
Yeah.
Blame that on the media because we should have.
Should have asked him that.
The reference there, I think, it's not clear what he's asking, but I think the reference is to the drive by Auburn, first drive of the third quarter. I think it was maybe the first series of downs. They're in a third and long situation. Throw a pass to one of their receivers who catches the ball over the first down line, but then on his own, without being hit, retreats back inside that line and then gets tackled.
That's right.
And what happened was the officials awarded him forward progress, which is absurd because he didn't get pushed back.
Yeah.
So the league should have known, the people upstairs should have recognized it, but they didn't. So that leaves it up to Arkansas to say, whoa, wait a minute here, let's look at that again. Yeah. And that didn't happen. And that's, to me, the question. What does Sam Pittman have in the way of making sure that doesn't happen? Because he doesn't seem to review much.
No, he doesn't.
And it's almost like he doesn't have somebody, like you should have somebody on your staff that looks at those things, that's sort of eyeballing it, and then goes back over and says, man, we got to review that.
Yeah.
So we'll try to remember to ask him that the next time.
I think we talked to him on Wednesday.
Yeah,
Thursday.
We had a Zoom today, and nobody in the media asked about that, and they should have.
My bad, folks. All right, our next question comes from Austin Hogfan, who wants to know, without Boyd and Burke back to see us score at least 40, do you see us really able to win against Ole Miss? I'm trying to stop thinking about the Auburn loss by the SEC office.
Well, I don't know that Boyd and Burke won't be back.
Yeah,
I don't think they've been ruled out for the game. So, but even if they are, I mean, you've seen Davion Warren come in and sub pretty good for Burks, and you've seen Traylon Smith do a good job for Rakeem Boyd. So it's not like Arkansas is just suddenly in the trouble with those two guys out. And if they get them back, that's even better because you got depth, and you can play them all four of those guys. Again, I think what I said before about this game, it probably will be a track meet.
Yeah.
And a game like that is usually decided by turnovers. Somebody makes a mistake or two mistakes, and that puts them in the hole, and the other team wins. Let's hope that is Arkansas that avoids mistakes and creates mistakes for Ole Miss's offense.
Our next question comes from WooPig88, who says, for the past 2 weeks, Felipe Franks has put up elite stat lines, but he still doesn't seem to have the elite quarterback feel to him like you would expect to accompany those stats. What is missing from his game to put him on that next level?
Yeah, I don't think anything is missing at all. Again, I think we're seeing him progress like you would when you transfer from one school to the next. It's not like he's been here for 4 years and this is his senior year.
And working in the same offense.
Exactly. So I think it's still too early to put a limit on how good was he. I mean, we don't know. But I do believe if he continues to improve, he could be one of the best quarterbacks in the history of the school. He's got tremendous talent. He's easily the best quarterback they've had since Brandon Allen, easily. Yeah. And he might be better than that. He might go all the way back to some of the better quarterbacks that Arkansas has. I mean, he could end up better than Ryan Mallett. You could sit here and start naming quarterbacks. Yeah. Might go all the way back to Joe Ferguson or Bill Montgomery. The team might not be as good, but he may be one of the best, when it's all said and done, one of the most talented quarterbacks Arkansas has ever had. He's tall. He throws the deep ball well. We see him react under pressure, and he doesn't seem to panic. He can run when he has to. He's physically tough. He got banged up in that game and kept coming. So I think I don't know what you're talking about with what he has to do to be elite. I think he's looking pretty elite already.
I agree with that. All right, our very last question this week comes from Altstat on Hogville, who says, when was the last time that an Arkansas win felt as big as the win versus Mississippi State University? Also, overall, how important was an early win for our season, since most projected us not to win till we got to Ole Miss?
You know, that's probably, in terms of fan reaction, probably the biggest win since maybe that Henry Heave at Ole Miss.
Yeah.
People love that game. So it's another Mississippi school. So you got to go back at least that far. And then how important to get an early win like that? Well, it has to do with the coaches, the players buying into this coaching staff. You can be a new staff and come in and convince everybody things are different.
Yeah.
But they have to see results. And by getting a win in just their second game with this new staff, I think early on it established, and we heard it from these players, this coaching staff is different. They know how to coach. We do what they ask us to do, and then the results are there, because it's very frustrating to do what coaches ask you to do and not win, because then you start wondering if they know what they're talking about. But if you do what they say and you win a game, then you say, hey, wow, things can turn around, gives you more confidence. So that's why it was important to win that Mississippi State game that early in the season.
We'll see if they can pull off a win this weekend against Ole Miss. But that is going to do it for Ask Mike. For Mike Irwin, I'm Tara Talmadge. Guys, we'll see you back here next Monday.